Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, we talk about the 1985 movie Red Dawn. At some point in our lives, we've experienced enemy soldiers parachuting in and ripping everything apart. How we respond is critical to how we move forward. But if we prepare now for the unexpected to occur, we don't have to be afraid. Wolverines! Join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me on this chilly fall evening is Sarah Daniels. Hey, Sarah, how are you doing tonight?
Wolverines! I'm good. Excited to do this movie.
You know, every time I told somebody that we were going to do that, that was their response, was Wolverines.
Yeah, it was. Come on.
So we are not wasting any time going into, and we're not talking about any pre-show. We're not going to, we'll talk about trivia along the way, I'm sure, because, I mean, Sarah's got her Red Dawn t-shirt on.
Yes, I do.
She would have read the novelization had there been one, but she spent the afternoon reading the screenplay, as one does. Just whiling away the afternoon reading a screenplay of a movie from 40 years ago.
It was actually the original screenplay. This was the screenplay that the co-screenwriter Kevin Reynolds wrote as his final thesis when he graduated, film school or something. And then John Milius came along and was like, "Oh, that's a great script. I'm going to totally rewrite it." But I'm glad he did, because that original screenplay
for good reason.
Oh, it's dark, man.
So what are the big differences that you noticed in the original screenplay versus what came out on screen? And by the way, this is a pretty normal thing. If you look, I did some of this with Fury. You thought the guys were gritty in the movie. They were much harder to like than they were in the screenplay, and they were a lot rougher than these rough guys already were. So sometimes you write something and you're like, "Oh, this isn't going to work." So what was something that you saw that was different, Sarah?
Yeah. So first off, the original title of the movie was going to be 10 Soldiers, because there was originally 10 Wolverines, not 8 like there are in the movie. And it plays off a lot like kind of with a really strong Lord of the Flies, kind of vibe. No, I'm serious. There is definitely some of that. Yeah, it was just a lot darker. At the end, only one of the Wolverines gets away, and that's because literally everybody else has died horribly. Like much worse than they do in the movie.
What, Danny didn't get shot down by the Soviet helicopter plane thing?
Well, Danny actually was one of the ones who survives at the end of the movie, but in the original screenplay, he got gunned down but was still alive, and so the Wolverines left him by the side of the road, and he was picked up by the communists, the Russians, and taken and basically tortured to death. They poured salt in his eyes. I was really horrified. I was like, "Oh, I'm so glad they changed this. This is so bad." And there was just a lot of, it was very brutal reading it. I can only imagine how it would have played out on screen, but it was.
Especially because you're talking about teenagers, not grizzled war veterans and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a very good segue, I think, for our next topic, because there is a difference if you watch this movie as a teenager versus, say, as a 48-year-old man here in 2023. I never saw this movie growing up or at any point in my history until watching it last week. I have to me, and I kept telling Sarah, I was joking around, I was like, is this like the prequel to Dirty Dancing? Because Swayze and Jennifer Grey are going to go off. And then, well, you even have then Charlie Sheen's in this one. Leah Thompson's going to go back to the future.
I was going to say, I mean, Charlie Sheen and Jennifer Grey were in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So, I mean, it could have been a prequel to that one,
That's right.
So, yeah, this had everybody.
What? It's
like your 80s teen actor bouquet,
Right. Before they actually learned how to act.
I know. Well,
crickets on that one.
They were warming up. You got to give it up for Swayze, though. Come on, Swayze was good. Oh, come on, he was better in this than he was in like Point Break.
Whoa! Bite your tongue.
I will not.
This is your wake-up call, Bodie. Actually, Point Break, I can't wait to do that one sometime. See, more Point Break, less, cheesy 80 movies. But apparently the Soviets, their army was trained by the stormtroopers, which is weird.
Right.
And the fact that 8 high school kids could somehow continue to thwart a trained army, I had a hard time getting past. Which I had a hard time getting past. They had no problem getting past security.
Nope.
The whole town is looking for you, including the guy who's 10 feet away in my shop.
Mm-hmm.
Where's our dad? In this prison camp that is not guarded. So we'll just go talk to him. And for the amount of times that people say don't cry or stop crying, there's a lot of crying.
There is a lot of crying.
And I understand this movie holds a special place. As I mentioned, every time I brought it up at Wolverines. Which I'm like, it was like said like twice in the movie. It wasn't even a thing. And it normally was it was like Scarface, say hello to my little friend guy shooting an AK from his hip. They're shooting AKs and RPGs and saws from their hip as, untrained high school students will do.
Oh, yeah.
Meanwhile, the like I said, the Russian helicopter only managed to basically kill one of the 8. Well, there was like 5 by then, but...
Well, according to the Russians, they estimated that they killed at least 12.
We killed at least 12. Yes. Yeah. That was actually accurate. That is how government officials and bureaucracy works.
Oh, yeah, totally. Just round it up.
I mean, we don't really know that Jennifer Grey died. We assume it, but we never saw a body.
Well...
I mean, we never saw Jed die.
No, actually,
we just assumed he did.
I have actually read fan fictions where Jed and Matt survive somehow and make it to free America or become keep on doing guerrilla warfare tactics and stuff. Because you never do see them stop breathing.
They go their separate ways, and one goes to Ferris Bueller, and one goes to
Dirty Dancing.
Dirty Dancing. That's what happens.
It's from what lasted
It's called
later.
Dirty Dancing and Ferris Bueller's. That's the fan fiction.
Yeah.
All right. So I was texting one of my friends, one of our Patreons, Matt Gleaves, about this. And he says these movies strike chords with us at certain times in our lives. And unfortunately, it makes us nostalgically hold them as the gold standard. Sort of like when watching the A-Team. Oh, I love that show. If you watch it today with a critical eye, that's a very terrible show.
Oh, it is a very silly show, but
it
it's
makes
so much
no
fun.
sense at all.
It's so much
or
fun.
MacGyver.
Dukes of
or
Hazzard.
Airwolf. Dukes of Hazzard is the worst. I don't know. We might get canceled just for saying Dukes of Hazzard.
Oh, please. The Dukes of Hazzard ruled. My brother and I watched that every Friday night, 8:00 for years, man. I love the Dukes of Hazzard.
Once he got off his Tron kick.
Yeah.
But because you saw this as an adolescent, my buddy did. So many people did. I did not. So I don't have those ties to it that so many people do. So it doesn't resonate. I don't have thoughts of seeing this for the first time because I just saw it for the first time last week. And comparing to the stuff that I've seen in the previous 30 years, 40 years, it doesn't hit the same. So you were talking about one of the things that was challenging for you, even just sort of doing the preparation, figuring out what you wanted to talk about, was how you had, I can't remember the exact phrase you used, but it was basically like, this movie gives you all the feels.
Yeah, pretty much.
So unpack a little bit of, when you say that, what does this movie bring to life in you that makes it mean so much to you?
Well, before I answer that question, I just want to say I am astonished that you made it through your adolescence without seeing this movie, because every single guy I know not only watched this when they were a teen, like just holds it very near and dear to their heart, especially guys, and I thought that it was like required viewing for teenagers in the 80s, like, didn't it like come in the mail with samples of Tide, like you just had to watch it.
Oh, come on, not Tide. It would be with your first razor blade.
Yeah.
It was being with a Gillette.
Yeah. Which, by the way, how many months did they spend up in the mountains and no beards at all among any of them? So
they were that young.
I guess so. But yeah,
they stole those too.
Yeah, they stole everything except razors that they needed. But yeah, all the feels. Yeah, I mean, I think when I was younger and I watched this movie, I would get so caught up in the action of it. And it was just, so exciting to see like the underdogs fighting against the big bad communists. Because remember, this was in the 80s, Cold War, like hardcore.
Better dead than red.
That's right. Good kid. Get those commies.
America.
Yeah, that's right. America.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But, like, it was so exciting to see us, like whooping the commies off. They're going to invade us. We're going to kick you, right out of the country and stuff. And so there was that.
Because I mean, that's another thing. Because if the Soviets, the Russians, were going to invade, they would invade a small town in BFE and really focus on hitting the school hard. Strategic military target that was.
No. Well, actually, it was if you'd listened during the explanation that Colonel Tanner gives, it was part of their plan to divide America in half. But anyways, getting back to the feelings.
Actually, that was actually the one piece of good writing. But where the teacher is talking about how and I can't remember the army, but he talked about them using the pincher technique where the army would come in from two sides and capture.
Oh, yeah.
And attack the one in the middle. So that's what we see happening. Another flip that you had mentioned was it was the Russians coming down from Alaska. Mm-hmm. And originally it was the Mexicans coming up from Mexico or Texas, I guess. Good luck getting through Texas.
Right? Seriously.
And do it. So that was like they were demonstrating that technique that the teacher was actually speaking of before he got viciously gunned down.
Teasdale, Mr. Teasdale. Well, now, my friend.
You know the name of the teacher? He's like last 30 seconds.
I just read
He's the first casualty of World War III.
I read the script, man. I remember, okay? You know me. I remember stupid things like that. So yeah, anyways, getting to the feels, yeah. But rewatching it like later on as an adult, you really start to see, what a tragic movie it is. And it's not tragic as in like a Shakespeare tragedy, or something like classic, like that. It's tragic in a very like deep and personal way. And, you get to see what each of these characters is going through, being put in the middle of this like intense situation, like where there's real active war, happening all around them. And, like some people like Robert, like takes his grief and turns it into bitterness, which turns into hatred and just this like lust for revenge. And he just shuts down emotionally completely.
It keeps me warm.
Oh, that quote just like gives me chills every time. I'm just like, dude.
Which is weird because it's about being warm. So you get chills.
No, it does. I hate to see bitterness do that to a person. I hate to see grief do that to a person. And I know that it happens, but having dealt with, my own measure of grief over the course of my life, I mean, as a Christian, I eventually turn to God with those things. I know it took me, when my mom, we were just talking about it before we started recording, but when my mom died, you know, like I was saying, I wasn't mad that God took her away from me. I was mad that I felt that he left me to deal with the situation by myself, which totally wasn't true, because I was surrounded by extended family and friends who put themselves out to be there and support me and encourage me, and they were just incredible. But I still felt alone. You know, as a woman, as a single woman, you know, like I was mad that I didn't have like a husband who could be there with me 24/7 and, you know, like wipe my tears away, which is completely unrealistic. I get that.
It's a highly romanticized vision of marriage.
I get that now.
You might get 10 minutes.
No, I do. I get it. But in my grief, I wanted comfort. And to me, that's what comfort looked like at that point and stuff. But, you know, it wasn't until like 2 or 3 weeks later, after my mom died, that I was able to open myself up and let God come in and be that comfort for me, which is what he'd been trying to do in the first place. And I kept pushing him away because I felt like he wasn't enough. You know, like I was like, no, I want to be held. I don't want to talk to you right now. I just want to be held, you know, it's like, you know, and stuff. But when I finally let him in, I got a lot closer. My relationship with God went to this like whole new level, you know, and I could just be so like basic with my emotions, you know, and he knows me. He knows, you know, how I was feeling, and he understood what I was dealing with better than I did. And he was able to meet me in those places. And it was really beautiful once I let myself, you know, go there. But, you know, people like the character of Robert, I don't know what his spiritual life was, because it's not really touched on. I want to say maybe he wasn't a Christian, maybe he didn't really know God, but maybe he did, because I don't want to just group that in and just be like, oh, Christians never deal with, you know, bitterness and hatred, you know, because that's completely untrue. But it makes me sad. It makes me sad to see somebody give in to the bitterness and lose themselves so completely in that they get satisfaction in the suffering of others. And, you know, it just makes me sad. It's just like, it's like, where does that go? That leads to a dead end. That's not going to take you anywhere. Right. So Robert's character, it makes me sad. I like the character of Jed. I think Patrick Swayze I just think he was terrific in this movie. I mean, I feel his character.
It was the time of their lives.
Oh, shut up. He was like, yeah, okay. Anyways. Jeez, Paul. You just like totally broke me out of my mood. Gonna break my train of thought, man. I had like really good deep thoughts, and you're coming in here with your dirty.
You love the character of Jed.
Yeah, I do. I love the character of Jed because of his humanness. You know, it's like he and his brother Matt, you know, like they've been brought up by a dad, you know, who is probably got a little bit of the survivalist prepper in him. He's taken them out to the woods to hunt and camp and, you know, trap and fish and stuff their whole lives. So he and his brother know what they're doing when they're forced to flee to the mountains. They don't feel like they're out of their element. They feel like they're in a situation where they can, you know, survive, you know, and keep the others alive for a while anyway. And so he's trying to take care of the others, but they're rebelling against him. And, you know, that's a little bit of a, you know, a scuffle there at first, until they come to recognize the fact that, hey, I think this guy might know what he's talking about. Maybe we should trust him and see what he can do before, you know, just giving up completely. And then later on, Jed is also able to step more fully into that role as a leader and, you know, like coordinate attacks and, you know, like take out supply lines and, you know, stop executions and things like that. But you see the toll it's taking on him as a person. So for all of this wonderful leadership that Jed steps into, and he doesn't shirk from it, he has real feelings. Jed never loses his feelings. And you see those times when he's by himself, and he is crying, like even when his dad's told him not to, and
so much crying.
but he's like, he's got his grief and he recognizes it and he deals with it, and he never lets bitterness overtake him like it does Robert, even though they both lost their fathers, and stuff. Jed doesn't let that bitterness overtake him. He still holds out hope, and stuff, and that things will maybe get better someday, and that while he's here, he's going to do whatever he is able to do to try to keep that hope alive.
That line that Maddie uses later in the movie when they're sending, I think he sends Tony off, and he said, Jed and I have given everything we have. We have nothing left.
We're all used up.
We're all used up.
Yeah.
That's the right word. And so Sarah didn't hit one of the things that she talked about, which I think is actually good because I want to use it to frame what the rest of our conversation is going to be. And that question, because it makes you think, what would you do if this happened?
Yes. Yeah.
And so what we're going to do is take some of the stuff. Sarah just gave you the synopsis of where we're going. Where when you're looking at it from a spiritual world, and John Eldridge and the Wild at Heart team a few months ago did a series sort of about spiritual preparation, the importance of the times, but they used the parable of the 10 bridesmaids.
Yeah.
Some versions call it the 10 virgins, where they're waiting for the groom. They're waiting to celebrate the arrival of the bridegroom. And in this story, the bridegroom is Jesus. And what you see is there's 5 wise, 5 foolish. And the 5 foolish ones, the hour goes late. The bridegroom is delayed in arriving. And the 5 foolish ones run out of oil. They don't have enough oil. And so they ask the wise ones, give us some of your oil. And they're like, man, if we give you oil, then we'll all run out. So they go out, they try to find oil in the middle of the night. By the time they get back, the bridegroom has arrived. They're all in there and they get shut out of the feast. Very similar to this movie. It's sort of a depressing ending, right? Especially if you're like, I just ran out of oil. It seems like a simple mistake. But in this scenario, that line we just used, the line that we just said, is one that many Christians feel today. I'm all used up. They're out of oil because the oil in the parable signifies the presence of the Holy Spirit, the life of the Spirit, the union with God. And that's what the whole purpose of the podcast series is. How do we keep our oil? How do we build our supply of oil for the delay of the bridegroom, for World War III happening in the back of the high school? How do we prepare when this happens? That's sort of where we're headed. And as Sarah mentioned, some of the preparation is not really stuff we want to go through. So that framework of what would you do? What would I do in this situation, in this scenario? If you're looking at that parable, those 5 wise bridesmaids are the ones with oils. We'd call them preppers these days, I think, because they had plenty of supplies. And we're just coming off of, we talked about war games last week with Mike. And this whole idea, like, I've had a lot of conversations with people recently about, okay, not a lot, a couple. I've had a couple conversations with a couple guys about this idea that if the power grid went down, within a year, 90% of us would be dead, mostly from starvation. Because if you had no power, you have no transportation, you have no refrigeration, you have no supplies, you have no capacity to, like, you can grow something today, it's not going to be ready for months. So what would happen? How would we live? And you're like, oh, well, that's likely not going to happen. But it does showcase our vulnerability and that question of, well, okay, what if it did?
Yeah. That's something that I think the germ of, quote unquote preparedness started in my mind when I first, watched this movie as a teenager, because again, like you said, exactly, that's always the pervading thought that I have when I watch this movie is, what would I do? what would I do? And I'm not talking about what would I do if the communists, invaded. It's, although, hey, who knows? It's like North Korea, they are definitely kind of sketchy. You never know. But I'm talking about, like, what would I do if there was a plague and my whole, world went into lockdown? Nobody thought that could,
like COVID.
Yeah, like nobody.
What if COVID happened again and we basically lived through 2020 again?
Nobody knew that was going to happen. Like, nobody. That wasn't a scenario that people pictured. And as a result, like, there was panic. Like, people.
We had no toilet paper.
We had no toilet paper.
You're prepping the wrong thing.
So, but I mean, like, and that was just the government telling people to stay home. Like, nobody was locked in their house. You could still go out.
Relatively low level.
Yeah.
I mean, in the big spectrum of things.
Yeah. And so now picture if something like that happened on a bigger scale, like you said, like if the grid goes down, which I think it was in Texas last summer. Portions of the grid were happening because of, like, intense, heat waves, I think, or something
in
like
the
that.
winter, because it was super cold there, and they would have rolling blackouts. Because my brother lived there, so they'd be like, it's cold when you can see your breath in your own house. Yeah. But they just had to wait for the power to flip back on to them so they could, heat their house.
So when I talk about, like, having a mindset of preparedness, I'm not talking about you have to build a bunker in your backyard, or, like, stuff like that. I mean, it's just a matter. I took a fantastic course 10 years ago, and you can look it up online. It's called Preparedness Peace, and it's run by a Christian, like, organization. This woman and her husband are missionaries, and they started it, but it's all about just being prepared, not like scary prepared where you're hunkered down with your guns, and like, nobody better come knocking on my door, and stuff like that, but just a matter of being prepared for if, like, there's a hurricane. Like, I live in the northeast part of New England. We have hurricanes a lot. I know you get them too. When those things happen, you get things like flooding, you get things like power outages, sometimes for days and stuff. And if you don't have any power, you don't have any water. It's like you don't have any refrigeration, and stuff. Your microwave and your stove don't work. Now, thankfully, I live in a house where we have a fireplace. And so since we have had, like, blizzards and storms where we've lost power sometimes, my roommate and I over the years have kind of, like, collaborated and built up, little things to just have around in case stuff like that happens. So one of the things that we have is we have a fireplace. So I bought a Dutch oven, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a big cast iron pot that has got like little legs on it that you can just sit on the coals in a fireplace or a fire pit, and you could use it to cook stuff, like that. And then we also have, we have a generator, that we keep in the garage. We have bottles of water. For a while there, we were doing this thing. Anytime we finished a soda bottle or a juice bottle, we would rinse it out and then fill it up with water and then store it in the basement. And so I think we probably have, I don't know, maybe like 20 bottles of water down there. I mean, it would probably have to be treated, with like drops or something like that before you could
boil it in the Dutch oven.
I could boil it in the Dutch oven, but it's actually easier if you just, I can't remember what the treatment drops are called, but just put a couple of
iodine
drops,
the water like purification stuff.
Yeah. So stuff like that. And, and then things like COVID, again, where like you couldn't get to the grocery store. And when you did, it was like there was nothing there. I remember the first time I went to the grocery store, and it was so funny. I still remember I actually was texting my roommate being like, I just feel like I've been grocery shopping in a communist regime, because you're wandering around. No, listen, you're wandering around the grocery store. There's like bare shelves, like completely bare, which I can't even tell you how weird that was. Everybody's in their pajamas, like shuffling around with masks on. Nobody's making eye contact. You could only take one of each item. It was weird, man. But so like when you're in a situation like that with COVID, like, and you could only take so much and there wasn't that much to begin with, yeah, it starts to make sense that the next time you go to the grocery store in a quote unquote normal time as we're in now, and you pick up a couple of extra cans of, canned vegetables or soups or whatever, and then you start making a little pile of it and stuff. So a lot of it is just kind of common sense. And then you can take it even to like a next level and start developing your skills. Like I recently got my ham radio license, and that's something I had been, kind of playing around with for a couple of years. And our friend Troy, he's a ham guy too. And he's been, on me about it. So I finally, studied, and I took my test, and I passed. I got 34 out of 35 questions. So I was psyched about that. But I was saying to my roommate, I was like, this is great, because now that I'm licensed, if we have a storm or something and the power goes out, if you don't have power, you don't have internet. And if you don't have internet, your cell phone's not going to work. And what if there's I don't know, something like somebody hurts themselves, I fall and break my leg, and there's no power. I can radio somebody, that like, hey, I need an ambulance at this address or something. So, it's just a good mindset to have, I think. And obviously I'm talking all about the physical stuff, but there's certainly, the spiritual things that you can do to prepare yourself as well, which is, knowing your Bible when you're going through things like I did, last summer with grief and struggle, knowing those scriptures that you can go to that God's going to use to speak to you, and tell you that it's not always going to be like this, that things are going to get better, that he works through everything, that he's there for you, that he loves you, and stuff like that. So those are just as important.
And if we spend this much time on our physical stuff, and as you mentioned, you don't need to be a prepper with a bunker and supply of 100 days worth of food. You could be, if you have a spare tire in your jack, you're a prepper.
That's right.
And there's wisdom. I mean, Jesus talked about being prepared. A man does not build a tower unless he first counts the cost and says, can I do it? He doesn't go to war unless he has enough soldiers and knows that he can be successful. There is a sense of being wise with our preparation. And again, going back to the parable of the bridesmaids, it is important to have enough oil. I'm sure that many of you, when we brought up this idea that COVID could come back, kind of puckered a little bit, if you know what I'm saying. Because we aren't ready internally. Our flames are low. We've been used up over the course of the last 3+ years.
Yeah.
And how do we keep that flame lit when we're waiting, when you're going through, as you mentioned, the death of your mom, when one of your best friends gets the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, when your son dies, when you lose your job, when the bad things happen, right? When the enemy parachutes in out of nowhere, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
I said, because the movie opens and Jed and Maddie are on their way to school and they're talking about the football game. They're talking about the grades and all this. And 2 minutes later, soldiers are parachuting in. And football and sports and grades don't matter that much when the enemy is attacking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've talked about a lot of that over the course of the life of this podcast, is the trauma and these events, the warfare we go through, help to clarify who we are and what's most important.
Yeah.
Because nothing will tell you what's most important than getting a diagnosis that you have basically a year left to live.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all that stuff that seemed to matter, like, you know what matters most to me is spending every night with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm not going on that trip. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to engage in that because this is what is most important. And so the question becomes how to find it, how to maintain it, how to keep going. And so we're going to play the first clip. This is from a scene that Sarah actually set up a little bit earlier, when the boys sort of find their home away from home up in the mountains, when they're freaking out, when they don't know what to do. And they're arguing over what should be done. And the guy who is the Calumet County High School class president chimes in because he thinks he knows what's best. And Jed has to sort of set him straight with this, and so we're just gonna kick it off.
But our families, huh? What about them? Huh? Gotta stay up here and hide a while. I just want to go home. I don't want to hide. If I hide, they'll never find me.
As Calumet student body president, I forward the motion that we give ourselves up.
I second the motion. We can't stay here. We need stuff, and...
Sit down, Danny. You're not going anywhere. It's too dangerous to go into town.
I say we vote on it.
No.
This isn't the big game, Mr. Quarterback. He can go wherever he wants.
No.
You're such a goddamn jock.
Hey, come on, guys. Knock it off. You wanna go so bad here, haul ass, take your shit. That goes for the rest of you. This is your chance to get walking. It is World War III down there. People are being killed. Those could be Russians.
Jed, what about your family? Huh?
I don't know. But I'm alive. And I'm staying here.
My family would want me to stay alive. Your family would want you to stay alive. I mean, you think you're so smart, man. But you're just a bunch of scared kids.
What do you think you are? Alone, I guess.
No, you're not. Hey, bud. What do you say?
I'm with you. All right. Now the rest of you get going. All right. But if you stay, you're gonna do exactly what I say, okay? Huh?
Yeah.
So come on over here and get warm. Okay. Matt and I have been coming up in these mountains with our dad all of our lives. We can hunt, we can fish, we can stay up here a long, long time. Okay?
How long, Jed?
Until we don't hear that no more.
When we're looking at that clip from the perspective that we're taking, sort of this idea of both prepping, but also not just from, obviously from the physical sense, but from the spiritual sense, what can we learn from this clip that, like, what stood out to you that's like, oh, that's good stuff right there?
I actually had this thought when we were talking a little bit earlier, and then you said you were going to play this clip, so I held on to it. But one of the things that really jumped out at me was that when you have a mindset of preparedness, whether it's physical or spiritual, you don't have to be afraid. And that's not to say that you won't be afraid, because if you're not, then I think you're just kind of dumb and stuff. But you don't have to, like, panic when things like this happen. Like, you know, like Danny was panicking. You know, he's like, well, what are we going to do? What about our families, man? We need stuff. We have to give ourselves up. It's the only option, you know, and stuff, because he didn't know what else to do. And you contrast that to the very last thing that Jed says at the end of that clip, where he's like, me and Maddie, we've been coming up in these woods for a long, long time. We can hunt, we can fish, you know, like we can survive. We're going to be okay. And if you guys stay here with us, you'll be okay, because we'll show you how to do stuff. You don't have to worry. And then, like, later on when they go and visit the Masons, you know, at their house, you can see the Masons have that same kind of attitude. Like, sure, they're concerned because World War III is happening, and that's a concerning thing. But you can see that they've got, you know, their like shelves of jams and jellies, and so they've got food, they've got, you know, stuff to get by on, you know, and so they're at rest in that, you know, like they're not panicking. They know that they're going to be okay, you know, at least for the moment. And that's not to say that you should put all of your trust in, like,
eggs in a basket.
Yeah, no, all of your trust in, like, your physical preparations, because, you know, obviously things can go wrong there too. But you know, in your spiritual preparation too, when bad things happen, yes, things are going to get unsettled. You're going to feel grief. You're going to feel anger. You're going to feel a lot of stuff. But ultimately, you can be at rest because you know God is who he says he is. He's not going to change. He's not going to leave you alone. He's going to be with you. He's going to provide for you and stuff. And as much as you may not believe it in the moment or want to hear that, it doesn't mean that it's not true and stuff. And so I think that's what I was feeling the most with that clip is when you have that mindset of preparedness, whether it's physical or spiritual, you can be at rest. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to panic when bad things happen because you've prepared. You've and granted, we can't think of every scenario that's going to happen, but
Right.
But you can feel okay. You can be like, no, you know what? It's going to be all right. So I think that's what I was getting. I like that.
I like the part where he calls them out. You're just a bunch of scared kids.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, we are. We're trying to figure this out. We don't know what we're doing. And the thought of living a life with on olives and SpaghettiOs heated up over the fire was not the best. But his response, Jed's response, when they say, well, who do you think you are? His response is how I feel in those moments. I feel alone.
Yeah.
Like you were saying earlier, after your mom died, you felt alone. Even though, as you mentioned, you were surrounded by people who were supporting you, praying for you, loving on you. It didn't look like how you wanted it to look.
Yeah.
And that's where I get stuck a lot. It doesn't look how you want it to look. And, those kids are all used to going to sleep on a mattress, in a bed, in a house. Now they're in sleeping bags out on the ground, exposed up in, what state was it?
Colorado.
Was it Colorado?
Colorado.
Seems like it was the mountains, probably right somewhere on the edge of the plains and mountains.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Denver is. So there's like a line where the Rockies go up. Everything left is mountains. Everything right is flat.
Yeah.
And so, they're used to a different lifestyle. And if you're not used to sleeping outside, if you're not used to some discomfort, you don't know how to respond when you're uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important to sort of train yourself. Some of the stuff like I read some stuff on the Art of Manliness website, and they'll talk about practice being uncomfortable. Take a cold shower, walk to the mailbox barefooted. Do things intentionally to be uncomfortable so that when those times hit that you are. And like you were saying earlier, that's why when we are comfortable, that's when we spend our time reading the Bible. That's when we spend our time sort of learning how to talk with God. I prefer that word to prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of times prayers are like wish lists or messages in a bottle or sermons to God. Yeah. But it's not about learning how to talk God into stuff. It's learning how to have a conversation. Like you were saying, you learned that what felt like a singular isolating event with your mother that really put into sharp focus. Oh, I don't have a guy here to hold me when I need to, when I'm here crying by myself. I feel so totally alone. It was actually God inviting you to say, no, I'm here and I'm enough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good because it really was. And I don't know, I don't want to sound callous, or trite when I say this, but I mean, I think God uses those situations to shake us out of our comfort zones and, build up our faith and, make us stronger and at the same time more dependent on him. I'm not trying to belittle anybody's, like struggles that they've had, and just be like, oh, you'll come out on this stronger than before, and what doesn't, kill you makes you stronger and stuff. I'm not trying to say
what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
I'm not trying to say that at all. I obviously have tons of compassion for people who are struggling, but I mean, the fact is that, my relationship with God now looks different than it did a year and a half ago. You know, it's definitely,
Right.
it's got more depth. You know, it's more intense. It's more, you know, basic on a lot of levels. And it's the kind of like the same thing that Jed does, you know, with the Wolverines. You know, it's like, yeah, he doesn't say it's going to be easy. He doesn't say, oh, everything's going to be just fine, you know, up here. He says that they'll survive, that they'll eat, that they'll, you know, have a safe place to be, that they'll live and stuff. But, you know, like this whole, it shows how this lifestyle changes them too, you know, and it lets them know what they really care about, what's really important to them, you know, and like you were saying earlier, kind of changes their priorities. You know, it's not about grades and football anymore. You know, it's about survival and
Right.
their families and stuff like that. So,
Yeah. And to transition to the other clip we're going to use when they're talking to their dad in the prison camp,
yeah.
a couple weeks ago, I read this in 2 Thessalonians, and it says, all this trouble is a clear sign that God has decided to make you fit for the kingdom. It's like, wait, no. And because I love that balance of, we can know it's going to be all right. We can know the truth. Like you said, that it's going to make us stronger. Romans 8:28, God works all things for the good of those who he called, all the stuff, right? Like my friend with cancer, he's going to wake up in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be, this is a win for him in our theological perspective, right? For his wife and 4 daughters. It's really hard. She's like, I don't want this. She can say both that and at church on Sunday when we're there, as my friend's kind of broken down and bending over and just weeping as we all were. She's got her hand on his back and she's singing Death Was Arrested as we're all praying for death to be arrested.
Oh, wow.
Like she is worshiping, singing like I am a wreck. I am over there mouthing the words if I'm lucky while there's like a puddle of tears and snot under my feet. And we don't want this. Right? When Jesus showed up with Lazarus, he knew what was going to happen, right? He's like, it's so that God will be glorified. He knew that this is going to strengthen your faith. It's all for the glory of God and all this. He knew the truth, but he still cried with them anyway. That's what Hebrews said. We don't have a high priest. We don't have a representative who did not suffer with us. He knows what we go through. He's in it with us. And that's the most important thing to remember. And so as we go to this clip of as Jed and Maddie see their dad for what'll be sort of the last time they get to talk to him. And he shares some words that I think, again, with that perspective of preparation, all this trouble is going to make us fit for the kingdom. Like we see how he has prepared them. And I think that a lot of times we need to look at God and what we're doing as that preparation for the battles in the life to come.
Yeah, I knew I was right. I knew it. You're alive. I was tough on both of you. And I did things that made you hate me sometime. But you understand now, don't you?
What happened, Dad? Why are you here? What'd they do?
Doesn't matter. One way or another, for one reason or another, we're all gone. It's all gone. Remember when you used to go in the park and play? And I used to put you on the swings. And both of you were so damn little, God.
I remember all of it.
Well, I ain't gonna be around to pick you up when you fall now. Both of you gotta take care of each other now.
I'll never see you again, Dad.
Yes, you will. I don't want to hear that, Maddie.
What happened to Mom, Dad? Where is she?
can't afford to be crying anymore now. I don't want either one of you ever cry for me again. Don't ever do it. Not as long as you live.
Where's my dad, Mr. Eckert?
I don't know, son. Go get going now. Get out before they find you.
Dad? I love you.
I know you do, son. I love you too.
And to me, there's that tension. And if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, you know I love the tension. I know I made you hate me sometimes. There's moments that I've told God, we're going to have words. I'm not listening to worship music. We're going to have words here at some point. And that idea that like God can both know that, remember, and what that verse from 2 Thessalonians, all this trouble is a clear sign that God has decided to make you fit for the kingdom. And that's true. The trouble. Okay, we've got trouble. But we're like, what we look at the externals of, if I've got this trouble, if my mom died, if my friend is dying, if, all this stuff, and we take it on ourselves, we say, God, you don't really love me, because if you love me, I wouldn't be going through this. Which is the interesting thing, at the end of the clip. I love you, Dad. I know. I love you too. Because in 1 Thessalonians 1, Paul writes, it's clear to us, friends, that God not only loves you very much, but also has put his hand on you for something special. And those are hard words.
Yeah.
When we're going through trouble, when you're feeling alone, it's really hard to feel like God loves you and has something special for you.
Yes, it is. I feel like one of the reasons I picked this scene as one of my favorite scenes was I really love the interaction between this father and his two sons, because, from what he says, you kind of get the impression that he was a pretty stern, maybe strict father, who didn't deal lightly with them a lot in their lives. Granted,
and maybe they didn't want to go up in the mountains every weekend to go hunting.
Maybe they didn't. Yes.
He's dragging them up, kicking and screaming.
Yeah, maybe they didn't. But they are also able. You get the feeling watching the scene that "I love you" was probably not spoken a lot in their house. And if it wasn't thrown around like, okay, I'm going to work, bye, I love you. It's like it probably wasn't thrown around flippantly. So when they do say it, it means a lot more, than if they just kind of threw it out there. And another thing that I like about this scene is that Tom, that's their dad, he seems like he knows how to face death with peace, and I don't know if the character's supposed to be, Christian or what, but he says that line where Maddie's like, I'll never see you again, Dad. And he goes, no, I don't want to hear that. You will see me again. So maybe he is a believer, and he's saying that in reference to, I'll see you again after. But, he's not afraid of dying. His sons aren't afraid of dying. I think they're more afraid of watching their loved ones die or not being able to protect the people that they're responsible for more than them actually dying, which is why at the end, they're able to go and Jed and Matt are able to go sacrifice themselves so that Tony and Danny can get away, and I'm sorry, Erica and Danny can get away, and they're not afraid to do that. They're not afraid to face down, the enemy or put themselves in harm's way, because again, they're prepared. They have that that peace, and they can rest in the fact that, this isn't the end for them, and they will see their father again. I liked that. That's what I took from it, at least.
So the question for us is, okay, well, what do we do? How do we, like your question, how would I respond if this happened? And so the idea is the preparation and I think even when we're going through the times that I think God is like, I know you must hate me right now. And like I said, my friend it's his brother who has the cancer, and he's like, I'm angry at God. And like, okay, that's okay. We can be angry at God. You look at the Psalms, they're full of it.
Yeah.
They're full of David venting that. But it's important to take that to God, to not hold it in ourselves and use it to to stay warm.
Yes, it keeps me warm. Don't let it burn you up.
It keeps me warm.
Don't let it burn you up.
Right. If we do that, we will die. We will be those bridesmaids whose oil has run out because we'll just be bitter. We'll be holding on to it. But instead, by taking that to God, taking him my grief, taking him, my wife asked why I was crying so much at church, what it is about that. I was like, it's because I sort of open up all my stuff and just give it to him. And whether that's anger or grief or sorrow or all the things, all the feels, as we said earlier. And that's what you said was helpful for you, is going out and learning how to be with God, right?
Yeah.
And letting him fill the need that you knew, like you had a need and you just wanted it filled a certain way, but you allowed him to meet that need, even though it didn't look like how you wanted it to look like.
Yeah. And it actually, it turned out better because, once I kind of was able to move past what I wanted in the moment, what God was able to do for me fulfilled me a lot more than I know a husband ever could. Because, a husband's not...
Yeah, we kind of suck sometimes.
No, but realistically, it's like a husband or a wife is not going to be able to be there for you 24/7. They're not going to be able to know you like God knows you. They're not going to be able to do for you like God is for you. They can't meet your every need. They can't like I know, they just can't.
Right. No, and it could be, I love what you just said there. Because I was never meant to meet my wife's every need. I'm a human fallen person. I'm going to screw it up. She's going to screw it up. If I put all my eggs in her basket, right? If I put everything on her, then it's just going to be miserable. We're both going to be miserable. And it doesn't even need to be relational. It could be job. It could be, where are you putting your hope? Where are you putting your need? Where are you saying, if just this would happen, then I would be content. But that's not what God's asking for us. He's inviting us to be content in him, with him.
Yeah. And even if we get it's kind of like what we've said before, even if we get what we think we want, it doesn't usually end up being fully satisfying as we thought it was going to be. Yeah, it just doesn't, because that part of our lives was meant to be filled with God, and nothing's going to ever be a good enough substitute for what God can do for us, what he can be for us. So even if we get what we want, in the moment, it's just not going to last. I think back to 9/11. And everybody remembers where they were at when 9/11 happened. And it's funny, I see a lot of similarities to like the beginning of this movie and that day, because it's like people were getting up, they were going to work, kids were going to school. I remember being on my way to work, and it was a totally normal day. There was nothing to indicate that the world was going to be turned upside down within a couple of hours. And one of the things I remember really well about that day is while the attacks were happening, there was so much panic and so much chaos and so much confusion because nobody knew what was happening. Everybody like had a different, oh, I heard this, I heard that, you know, and stuff. And then we'd hear about, you know, oh my gosh, another tower got hit. Oh my gosh, the Pentagon got hit. Oh my gosh, you know, their towers are falling, you know. And it just seemed to be getting worse and worse. And we didn't know what else was going to happen. And I remember, I think that's the closest I've ever come to like straight out losing it in my entire life, like losing it, like running down the hallway screaming in a total panic because I know it sounds funny, but literally not knowing what to do, you know, and stuff. And I think since then, like I've obviously matured a bit. I'm not going to say I'm anywhere near where I need to be because who is, but you know, as a Christian and as a person, where I think that if a catastrophe of that level were to happen again, I'm not saying that I'd be like, oh, no problem at all. But I'd say I feel like I could deal with it a little bit better because I have more of a preparedness mindset. You know, it's like I've definitely gotten to a different place as a Christian where my first reaction would just be to like reach out and be like, okay, God, I don't know what's happening, but I know that you do. So I just need you to hold on to me and like not let me go because I'm really scared right now and I don't know what's going to happen, but I just need you to be here and hang on to me, you know? And then, you know, like as, you know, a physical prepared person. I was so used to saying preparedness, a physically prepared person. You know, like, okay, you know, like, something bad's happening, you know, I don't know, maybe the grid has gone down, maybe the power's gone out. I'm going to get on my, you know, ham radio with batteries and see if anybody else out there has any news and see if we can get a better handle on what's going on and stuff like that. So I feel like I've really changed in the, you know, 20 odd years since that's happened. And I know that that's really helped me. And granted, there's always going to be stuff that catches us sideways. I wasn't expecting my mom to die. You know, like I wasn't expecting her to die that weekend. She was doing good, you know, like she was in good spirits and, you know, she was excited that her family was there for the weekend. And, you know, we had like a whole Memorial Day cookout thing planned and our whole family was there. And then the next day everything went to hell, you know, and it was just totally out of nowhere. And I wasn't prepared for that at all. But you do what you can and really, really sink your anchor in God. If you don't do anything else to prepare in your life, do that. You know, just sink your anchor into God because He's the one prep that you're never going to run out of or run dry on or, you know, be caught without, you know, and stuff. Just that, yeah, that's what I'd encourage everybody to really do.
Yeah. And just remember that even the troubles are to make us fit for the kingdom, and that even in the troubles, God loves us very much and He has a special purpose for us.
Yeah.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Sarah Daniels talking about Red Dawn, the 1984, the OG.
Yeah.
So we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?